Hello, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome back to the show, guys. If it's your first time here, I am your host, Monica, as always. And I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a lot. It's always a lot, isn't it? This episode has a little bit of everything. We are starting off with some truly bizarre headlines, the kind of stories that make you stop and say, wait, what is actually happening here? We are going to talk about unexpected wildlife situations involving an antelope casually roaming around Tennessee like it missed the memo about where it's supposed to live. And then we're diving into one of the strangest pieces of movie memorabilia to ever hit an auction block. And yes, this one involves a very famous scene from the Jim Carrey comedy Ace Ventura When Nature Calls. But after that, the tone is going to just completely shift. Our main segment today, we are going to talk about the heartbreaking case of 25-year-old Michele Carson. What started as a celebratory trip with a close friend would ultimately end in tragedy. And the investigation that followed revealed a disturbing pattern of control, violence, and manipulation that had been hiding just beneath the surface. And finally, before we wrap things up today, I will give you a little personal update because I recently had surgery. And let's just say the experience involved inflatable leg squeezers and a heated air mattress blanket and enough medication to make the entire day feel like a very strange ride. So, settle in. We've got strange news, a serious story, and a little real life chaos to round things out. All right, guys, let's get into it. Welcome back, guys. So, if you live in Tennessee, your morning commute probably consists of maybe the occasional deer or, wild road turkey. Well, residents of a neighborhood in Nashville recently got something a little bit more exotic. An African oryx antelope was spotted roaming around Jolton, Tennessee, which, for anyone keeping score at home, this is not exactly part of the African savanna. The animal was first spotted early in the morning near Old Marrowbone Road when a driver actually had to slam on his brakes to avoid hitting it. At first, the man said he thought it was just a really large goat sticking halfway out of the woods until he noticed the horns. And then those horns can reach 2 or 3 feet long, which is actually the point where you realize, okay, that's definitely not a goat. Photos of the animals started circulating on social media, and soon other locals chimed in saying that they'd seen it too, confirming that yes, there was in fact a wild African antelope wandering around the middle of Tennessee. Now, if you're wondering how this happens, the likely explanation is surprisingly simple. Exotic animals are actually legal to own in Tennessee. Authorities suspect that the oryx may have escaped from a private farm or some kind of exotic animal property nearby. And apparently, this isn't even the first time Tennessee residents have dealt with an unexpected wildlife situation. So last year, a zebra named Ed managed to escape and spent more than a week roaming Rutherford County before finally being captured and returned to its owner. So now the oryx is still out there living somewhere, possibly living its best life, possibly confusing every single driver who passes it, because nothing makes you question reality faster than driving to work and suddenly realizing you just almost hit a safari animal. So now that, we've discussed safari animals, let's just get into something a little even sillier. And if you grew up in the 90s, the next story might unlock a core childhood memory you didn't even ask for. Because one of the most ridiculous props in comedy movie history is officially going up for auction. The mechanical rhinoceros from the infamous butt birth scene in the 1995 movie Ace Ventura When Nature Calls is now for sale. Yes, that rhino. The scene starring Jim Carrey as an extremely unhinged pet detective involves Ace hiding inside the robotic rhinoceros while spying on villains in the African wilderness. Unfortunately for him, the fan inside the prop breaks, the desert heat kicks in, and things quickly spiral into chaos. Eventually, a completely overheated Ace Ventura has to escape, and the only way available is, crawling out the back end of the rhinoceros in front of a horrified group of tourists who believe that they're witnessing a rhinoceros giving birth. That was fun to say, you guys. I'm sure they had a lot of fun writing this. It is objectively one of the weirdest moments in 90s comedy. And now the actual prop used for the exterior shots in the film is hitting an auction block. So the mechanical rhinoceros measures more than 10 feet long. It includes an interior seat and a control area, and even still has a working hatch door and a fan inside. Hopefully, the fan actually works, unlike in the movie. After filming, the prop was partially dismantled, but collectors restored it back in 2019 by tracking down the missing components, including the now famous removable latex backside, because of course that was important to restore as well. The prop is expected to sell anywhere between $4,000 and $8,000 when bidding closes later this month, which honestly kind of feels like a bargain for a piece of cinematic history, depending on how badly you want the 10-foot rhinoceros that people mainly recognize as that thing Jim Carrey climbed out of. But hey, somewhere out there is a movie collector thinking, yes, this will be perfect in my living room. Now, normally we cover strange stories. They stay in the lane of bizarre wildlife sightings or ridiculous movie props showing up in auction. But sometimes the news takes a much darker turn because the next story isn't strange or funny, you guys. This is a young woman whose life ended far too soon, and the group of friends who are still trying to understand how a celebration trip to Las Vegas turned into a murder investigation. So, today, this story is the story of Michele Carson. Michelle grew up in West Covina, California, where she was known as a kind person. And people just gravitated towards her. She was friendly, she was warm, the type of friend who showed up when you needed her. And during high school, she was a part of a tight knit group of four friends. And I'm sure a lot of us can relate to this. Like you had your core group of friends in high school. This included Michelle, Vicky, Alexis, and Amanda. They were the kind of group that seemed absolutely inseparable. Like sleepovers, school events, long conversations about the future, the normal rhythms of teenage friendships where everyone feels like they're always going to stay close no matter what happens. But as graduation approached, life started pulling them in different directions. And, they all went off to different colleges, different campuses, different schedules, different experiences. Still, they did stay in touch. The bond they formed in high school held super strong, and that's great. And I'm sure a lot of us still have these kind of tight knit friendships. So, in 2010, one of those friends had just completed something that had deserved celebrating, but she was like super still stressed out about it. Just like it didn't feel right for her. She just felt like she didn't do a good job. So Vicky had taken a test called the GMAT, which is the graduate school entrance exam used for business programs. So anyone who has taken the GMAT knows that it is brutal, months of studying, enormous pressure, and a lot riding on the outcome. So once the test was finally over, Michelle had an idea. She goes to Vicky and she's like, let's go to Vegas. Not a long trip, just a quick getaway to celebrate surviving the exam and just to have a little bit fun before, real life starts again, graduate school or just the results of the test, just to like free their heads and just like step away for a little bit. So, in late October of 2010, Michelle and Vicky head to Las Vegas. And at first, everything just seemed normal. They went out on the strip, they saw a Cirque du Soleil performance, they walked around casinos and soaked up all the chaos of Las Vegas. If you've ever been to Vegas, it's really easy to just get distracted by all the things going on. And man, that just sounds like a fun time to go with your best girlfriend and just have a really fun weekend. At one point during the trip, they even spotted Matthew Perry, which is like amazing. I would have just completely, I don't know. I would have just been so starstruck if I had seen Matthew Perry, Chandler Bing from the sitcom Friends. It was exactly the type of random celebrity sighting that makes a Vegas trip feel, I guess, a little bit more exciting. So, Michelle also connected with a friend named Emile while she was there. Emile apparently had a crush on her, something that their circle of friends already knew. But it was more of like one sided. So, she really wasn't like into Emile in that way, but they were just really close friends. And while parts of the trip are fun, not everything was as carefree as it was supposed to be. So Vicky was still like emotionally drained from taking the GMAT. She later said that she spent a lot of the trip crying. She was worried about bringing down the mood of everybody. They were staying in a hotel suite with two bedrooms, and then they had like a shared living room space. So, on one of the nights, something happened that would later take an eerie significance in this situation. So, Vicky said that she heard a noise coming from outside her bedroom, which is also, I guess, outside Michelle's bedroom door as well, because they had the shared living room space. So, when she opened her door, she saw somebody standing there, and it was Michelle's ex boyfriend, Justin Burns. Now, according to her friends, Michelle and Justin had a very complicated relationship. They had broken up, gotten back together, broken up, gotten back together like multiple times. It was just that type of relationship that her friends just describe as toxic long before anyone outside of the friendship fully realizes how dangerous that it might have been. So, when Vicky saw him in the hallway, Michelle was still asleep. So, like, Vicky ended up talking to Justin briefly. And even in that short interaction, something just like felt wrong and off. She later described feeling creeped out, like something about the situation just like didn't make any sense at all. And then Justin also told her that he was going to the vending machine. So he like leaves the room. But before brushing it off, Vicky walked back into like the bedroom area to check on Michelle. Not to just like see if she was there, but to see if she was alive, which I thought was like a really like odd thing to say. But she did watch Vicky says she's like, I watched her chest rise and fall while she slept just to make sure she was breathing, which is extremely concerning if you're checking on your friend after you see their ex-boyfriend to see if they're breathing. But at this time, she assumed that she was just being crazy and paranoid and like over worried about Michelle. Justin eventually left. Later, Michelle woke up and asked why Justin had been there. But the moment passed like so many uncomfortable moments do. And the next day, they continued their Vegas trip, dinner, shows, and the usual activities. But Vicky was still just like overwhelmed and emotional. She didn't want to just ruin the rest of Michelle's trip. So she had made a decision to leave early and just fly back home by herself. And Michelle at that point just stayed in Vegas. That decision would become the dividing line between before and after, because days later, everything changed. On November 7th, 2010, Michelle's father received a knock on the door around 7 p.m. When he opened it, police officers were standing there. They asked him if his daughter Michelle had recently been in Las Vegas. He said yes, and then explained why they were asking him this. Her car had been found abandoned. The engine was still running. The doors were open, but Michelle was gone. Her family immediately reported her missing. Panic spread through her friends and family as everyone began trying to figure out what had happened. They started calling everyone who might know something. One of the first people they tried to call obviously was Vicky because, she was supposedly in Vegas at the time with Michelle, but she wasn't answering our phone. Eventually, Michelle's brother Kevin went to Vicky's house and personally tried to find answers. That's when they learned something unsettling. Vicky had left the trip early, but she said that she felt like something dark had happened when she found the news that Michelle wasn't answering her phone. Meanwhile, Michelle's other friends, Alexis and Amanda, were also trying to understand what was going on. Why had Vicky left? Why hadn't anyone heard from Michelle? The investigators discovered something critical. On November 6th, around 11 p.m., Michelle had made a phone call. It was the last call she would ever make. The number belonged to somebody connected to Justin. That revelation immediately shifted the direction of the investigation. Meanwhile, Vicky herself became desperate for answers. She reportedly called Michelle's phone carrier, begging them to just tell her the last numbers that Michelle had dialed. Eventually, somebody just gave it to her, which good for her for digging that far, but I don't think you're supposed to do that, but whatever, it is what it is. And it confirmed their biggest fears at this point. The call had been connected to Justin's brother. By that point, investigators were already considering Justin as a person of interest, and soon the worst possible news arrived. When Michelle's parents and Vicky traveled to Las Vegas to meet with investigators, they were just completely terrified at this moment about what they might hear. But literally nothing could prepare them for the truth. Police had told them Michelle's body had been discovered. It was discovered in a desert. She had been burned and she was just 25 years old, which is just the utmost saddest thing ever. It's just so sad, this whole situation. As investigators began building their case, Vicky finally revealed something that she had been keeping private. Michelle had confided in her about Justin, about things she hadn't told anyone else, things you only tell your best friend and you expect them to just keep this secret forever. And that secret included that Justin had been physically abusive to Michelle. That information immediately gave investigators a clearer picture of this relationship, and their first priority became finding Justin Burns. But Justin had vanished. Detectives examined phone records from the night of when Michelle was killed. Those records showed that Justin had repeatedly tried to contact her. At one point, she had locked him out of her hotel room, but somehow he managed to gain access to it again. And then there was another critical piece of evidence. Justin's phone had pinged near the location where Michelle's body was eventually found. Around 1 a.m., detectives began calling Justin. They called his brother. They called his father. Nobody is answering at this point. And it quickly became clear what had happened. Justin Burns was on the run. Even more disturbing, he had taken Michelle's car keys, which meant he potentially had access to her family's home because of the keys. So her parents were forced to change their entire routine, living in fear that the man responsible for their daughter's death might show up any minute. Weeks passed, then months. Finally, on March 17th, 2011, Justin Burns was located in Mississippi. He had been hiding. He was arrested and brought back to face charges. But even from jail, the manipulation continued. At one point, Justin called Vicky directly. He tried to convince her to say something very specific. He wanted her to confirm that she had saw him in the hotel that night, and he seemed out of his mind because if she did say that, he could attempt to claim insanity. Vicky refused and she hung up, as she should. Eventually, Michelle's family agreed to a plea deal, hoping it would guarantee that he would stay behind bars for life. For years, they continued to fight to make sure that that had actually happened. But in a final act that many viewed as cowardly, on June 8th, 2023, Burns died by suicide in prison. For Michelle's family and friends, the grief never truly ended, but the experience changed the way that many viewed viewed the world, and especially Vicky, because she often reflects on that moment in the hotel hallway, that uneasy feeling that she couldn't quite explain. And now she says something simple but powerful. She no longer stays quiet when something feels wrong. If something seems off, she speaks up because sometimes those instincts are trying to warn us. Sometimes ignoring them can have a very devastating consequence. If you or someone you know may be experiencing domestic violence, help is available. You can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline by calling 1-800-799-SAFE or visiting thehotline.org for confidential support. You are not alone and help is available. All right, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to give you a little personal update because it has been a week, you guys. And by a week, I mean I had surgery, accidentally tried to go back to work way too early, and have basically been learning that apparently the human body requires recovery time. Who knew? So let's start with the day of surgery. I arrived at the hospital at 9 a.m., which already felt aggressive because if you know me, I'm not exactly someone who wakes up and thinks, you know what sounds good today? Surgery. So they get me checked in, and the first thing they do is put me in one of those like hospital beds with what I can only describe best as an inflatable air mattress blanket situation. And listen, I'm not exaggerating when I say this thing felt like a cross between a sleeping bag and a human sized popcorn maker. It inflates with warm air and just kind of swooshes around. And yeah, it just felt like an inflatable, I don't know, bounce house on my body. And honestly, it wasn't terrible. And then they put these inflatable compression wraps on my calves. If you've never had these before, they basically look like blood pressure cuffs for your legs, and they slowly inflate and deflate to keep your circulation moving and help prevent blood clots and stuff like that. So now, I'm laying there in a hospital gown, wrapped in a warm air burrito with robot legs gently squeezing me. At this point, I'm like, okay, this is weird, but manageable. Then the nurses start bringing in the medications. And when I say tons of drugs, like a lot of drugs, like not in a scary way, more in a modern medicine is wild kind of way. Because one minute you're anxious and staring at the ceiling, thinking everything that could possibly go wrong, and the next you're like, oh wow, I feel fantastic. This is what floating must feel like. It was a trip. I felt absolutely amazing. I was definitely nervous going in. Anytime someone tells you that they're going in to remove a tumor, it's not exactly something you shrug off. But the surgical team was amazing and everything went smoothly. Although they did discover that during the procedure, the tumor was actually like bigger than they had expected. So when I had it ultrasounded, it was 5 centimeters, and then MRI'd 7 centimeters. And when they got in there, it was over 9 centimeters. So it was growing fairly rapidly. But yeah, that's not tiny. So I have a pretty big incision where they took that out. Because of that, the size of it, before we went in, suggested that they do full anesthesia. They were going to do just like a partial anesthesia, but like they wanted me to be fully under, which is totally fine because frankly, I did not need to be awake for that adventure. The next thing I remember, I am waking up after feeling like I had a really awkward, confusing, like most confusing nap of my life. That feeling like when you wake up and for about like 10 seconds, you have no idea where exactly you are. That was me, except add nurses, machines beeping, and someone asking if I want crackers, which obviously the answer was yes if you have gluten free crackers. And so they had like these gluten free biscuits and they did taste like cardboard. They were not good, but I ate the whole thing because I hadn't eaten in almost like, I think it was 20, 23 hour or no, 22 hours at that point, whatever. It was a long time. I was really hungry, but like also not because I was on the drugs. It was confusing. It was very confusing. And then the overconfidence kicked in at this point because in my mind before surgery, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm totally fine. The next day, I'll go back to work, which was extremely optimistic. Post surgery, me was flying high on painkillers and absolutely not operating at full capacity. Like, I was functional, but also like slightly spacey at the same time. Everything felt hilarious. Everything felt slow. And my brain was basically like a browser with 17 tabs open and no idea where the music was coming from. But somehow I still convinced myself that I'm going back to work the next day. And I thought that was a great idea. Spoiler alert, it was not because all of those pain medications wore off and the hangover effect kicked in, and nobody talks about that enough. So you finish your meds, and suddenly your body is like, oh, hey, remember that surgery we had yesterday? Yeah, that part. I spent the next day, um, uh, like when I completed the next day after the surgery at home, I went to work the next day and I just had this like feeling that I had just come back from like the weirdest party of my life or something like that. Like it was like a weird loopy slash hungover feeling. It was just strange. But luckily today we are about when is it? 4 days out after surgery, five, 4 or 5, 4. I don't, yeah, 4 days out after surgery, and I'm doing totally fine overall. I am there's just one thing happening and it's I keep bleeding, so I just have to keep replacing a gauze pad because the skin is just so thin and weak in the area where it was removed, which apparently is normal, just mildly annoying. So I'm picking up more dressings and basically trying to follow the doctor's advice, which is don't walk around too much, which honestly is the hardest instruction ever for me. So I'm trying. Because apparently, when somebody tells you to rest, your brain suddenly decides that now is the perfect time to organize your entire house. I am trying, you guys. I am trying to sit still. I'm trying to heal and I'm trying not to push it. Meanwhile, home life continues to be chaotic in the best way, thanks to my son, who has been crying throughout this entire recording. If you are hearing that in the background, I don't know how good my mic is in canceling that out. I guess we'll find out when I do my edit because, toddlers have absolutely no regard for, what you're trying to do or for your recovery schedule. They're just out there living their best lives. And my son in particular seems to be growing at the rate which feels scientifically impossible. Like, I swear he goes to bed one size and then he wakes up the next morning slightly bigger overnight. It's wild. But there have been some big wins recently. First of all, he found his favorite sippy cup. So we are off the bottle. He has not had a bottle all week. I am very happy about that. We landed on a Munchkin brand sippy cup. So yay. Thank you for that, Munchkin. Parents will understand the significance of this because when a toddler decides a cup is the cup, losing it becomes a full household emergency. We are just basically living through this sippy cup um, situation for a while now. It'll be fine. Peace will be restored eventually. He will get used to it, and maybe we'll move on to, something with a straw soon for milk. So, yeah. Everything has returned to order in our kingdom. And the other thing that has been happening is his vocabulary explosion. He's suddenly learning more colors. Like every day, he's pointing at things and confidently announcing colors in that proud toddler voice. Sometimes they're correct, sometimes they are creative interpretations. And the enthusiasm is still there. So that's all that counts. Honestly, like watching your kid figure out the world, that is one of the coolest things ever. It's like you're watching a tiny human unlock new software updates in real time. So while surgery recovery has been very chaotic for me this week, life is good. I am healing. The toddler is thriving, and I am doing my best to actually follow my doctor's orders and just sit down, which again, harder than it sounds. All right, guys, that is going to do it for today's episode. We started off with some truly bizarre headlines from wildlife that apparently decided Tennessee looked like a great place to spontaneously road trip, to a piece of movie history that proves even the strangest props can become collectibles. Then we took a deeper look into the tragic case of Michele Carson, a reminder of how quickly a fun getaway can turn into something unimaginable and why recognizing warning signs in relationships is so important. And finally, I shared a little bit of my own week, which included surgery, a humbling reminder that recovery is real, and the ongoing chaos of raising a toddler who seems to grow overnight and has a very strong opinion on which sippy cup is acceptable. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow, subscribe so you don't miss out on the next one. And as always, thank you so much for spending part of your day with me. You can follow me on YouTube, Instagram, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, all of the places. I'm there. Take care of yourselves, guys. Trust your instincts, and I will see you next time. Okay. Love you. Bye. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. The facts are fuzzy. Our stories and opinions are just that, stories and opinions, not meant to be taken as professional advice.